All right, everyone. Welcome back to the Umana Yana podcast. We appreciate you rocking with us, even through the technical difficulties. And you know what? Sometimes when we get those challenges, it just means that that conversation is worth returning to. So we are going to start back with the same question that we got cut off a little bit because I feel like Jamil is really delivering something very powerful here. So my brother Jamil, what I asked was around this idea of, when we have a mixed family or there's multiple different communities that exist within that, all the cultures sometimes, sometimes there is that respect for it and bring it all to the table. And sometimes, we have these experiences where maybe one might dominate over the other. Right. And you shared that in your book, you really were able to capture all sides and give all of the different cultures that are represented within your family their chance to really shine and learn about themselves a little bit more. Right. And perhaps even the other parts that are of you that they might not have experienced. Right. So, I really want to hear from you about your experience of really honoring all parts of yourself and how that's been received. Because I've seen your social media, and at different points in the year, you are celebrating different things. And so I'm curious what the response has been around that and how you sort of view that. Like, do you view that as a responsibility? And kind of just your mindset around that.
Yeah, so like I was saying before the technical difficulties, I like in the very beginning, like I made content and I talked about being Indo-Jamaican, Afro-Jamaican, right? And I used those terms, right? At one point, like though that was in my bio, Indo-Afro-Jamaican, Afro-Indo-Jamaican, depending on the day, depending on which one came first. Right. And I would get pushback for that. People would say, like, why are you identifying as Indo? You clearly present as Afro, then like that was, I would say, the pushback side of folks, right? And then you get really into the weeds in terms of the negativity that would come with that. But then on the flip side of that, you had folks who were of the mainland South Asian diaspora saying, seeing you like identify and honor those practices of your ancestors gives us hope for our own descendants, our own kids, with us being in the diaspora ourselves now, right? So I've seen both sides of it. Of course, within our Caribbean community, similar concept, right? Like I see folks who would say you're Jamaican, you're a Black Jamaican, identify strictly as that. And then there are those who would say, well, I'm also, and it was funny because I had one friend who I remember she mentioned it in high school, but when we were in high school, it didn't mean as much as it means to us now as adults, I think. And it does have to do with that, like circling back to that elder knowledge when she was like, oh, my dad's grandma was East Indian, But then, like, recently, I also had a friend from high school who was like, or their mom's grandfather was East Indian. And I was like, huh, imagine we were in high school for, like 3 years and that was never a thing that we talked about. It's crazy.
Yeah.
But I would say like that opened a door, right? And I have a whole bunch of mutuals now on TikTok and Instagram who are of the East Indian Indo-Jamaican background, and we linked because here was I talking about it, right? It was something that I think for at least Jamaicans, at least we acknowledged it, we knew it. It wasn't necessarily something we put out there, but like more folks started making content talking about their own family histories. I'm thinking of one mutual I have who it's never been her content, right? Like I would never say she's a Indo-Jamaican content creator because like that then means like she makes content about being Indo-Jamaican. She would just make content about herself, but
Mm.
because she's making content about herself, her grandmother making egg and roti is just a part of it, Like that's just a part of it. So I would say for me, and I'm glad to say like I come from a community and a family that embraces me, right? I think of these comments where I had folks saying, you know, the Indians don't claim you, you do so much, but the Indians don't claim you. And like I said, my grandmother's cousin doubled down and was like, "You're mixed." And in my head, I'm thinking about all the people who are like, they don't claim you, and like I'm thinking about like percentages, but like family doesn't see you in percentages. I am and thankfully so, I am my mother's child, and it's like a straight line of women. There's no denying me, right?
Yeah.
So like I couldn't deny it if I wanted to, like in Jamaica we call it a jacket. There's no jacket here. It's my mom and it's my
Yeah.
mom's mom. So like when Aunt Herman is like, so you're mixed, right? Or like when I have family who, I'm now like haloed as like, but Jamil makes roti. His roti may not be the best looking roti, but Jamil makes roti,
There
you
you
know?
go.
like these are conversations that my family is having, like when we have the annual pagwa down here with, and I'm not Hindu, right? But I have Hindu relatives. I acknowledge that in the family tree there are some Hindu ancestors. I have Hindu friends, right? So when
Mhm.
I'm at pagwa, the big thing is like it's Jamil back at it again, helping, set up the beers. It has passing out gula. That's me. When we have jamming in the park, I'm there. So I'm grateful that I've never been on the receiving end in real time, in like face to face. Social media is one aspect of it, but like real time, I've never been in an environment where either side has positioned me to feel like I needed to choose or I could not, engage in both sides. And I think for me, because I identify from this perspective of like I am a Jamaican whose ancestry comes from multiple places, I navigate as a Jamaican as such. So I look at something like curry goat that every Jamaican household knows how to make. But then I look
Mhm.
at something like dal and bat or dukunu, which is very more circumstantial in terms of the households you're getting it. But again, like I've never had to choose, and I'm glad that I've never been put in that position.
Yeah, no, I think that's special, and this really is encouraging for me. As I think about the direction I want to take, in how I show up for my lineage, right, to impact it positively. And I say that because what I thought about this earlier this year. Like there's so much diversity in my family, whether you consider from a religious perspective or from a cultural perspective, whatever, right? You can go on and on. But I find that there's almost this thing that, like, okay, the best way that I can acknowledge and respect the fact that you're different is to not ask you about it, right? So
Mm.
like, I sat in a room and I'm looking around and I'm like, okay, hang on. If I was a kid, right, I would be curious about why so and so, like, why do you guys follow this one? And why do you guys follow that one? And why do you
Mhm.
guys dress this way? Why do you guys celebrate that one, but you guys don't celebrate that one? Like, I would want to be able to ask these questions, right? But I've grown up in an environment where you don't really ask those questions, and it's almost treated as rude to ask those questions, right? And I really like what you guys have done, where it's almost kind of going in the opposite direction. It's like, no, there's space for all of you, right? Like every part of you that makes you up, right? Like all of it is welcome here, right? And it sounds like you have really taken the responsibility, if you will, to continue to build that legacy of, hey, like we're all one, we're all family. Like why do we need this division, right? Like you can ask that question. So my question to you is, like, having this diversity within yourself, how is it that you show up so that people around you feel safe to actually engage in these types of conversations and ask these questions? Because you might very well be the first and only person in their whole life where this opportunity kind of feels safe.
Yeah, so I think part of it, or like maybe the foundation of it, comes from my anthropological background as an anthropologist, working in museums, working with different cultures. So like the focus of my and yeah, so I'll say the focus of my major anthropology research is rural East Indian families in Jamaica, their kinship structures and cultural retention, right? So in other words, how do these country Indian families relate to their relatives, and then what traditions from India are kept, right? And so that's where that like focus comes from. So like when I engage with my relatives and then community members, it's from this basis of like, cool, here's where we're at, but how did we get here, right? And
Mm.
so for example, like what are kinship terms, right? I thought it was interesting that in my family, who claims nobody speaks any type of Indian language whatsoever, words like alu and baigan and baji are still used, right? That my great uncle, his children call him Bayaji. And I'm like, all right, so I know Baya means brother, G means respected. Why are his kids calling him
Mhm.
respected brother? Like, okay, I wasn't there. I don't know the inside story, right? But then
Right.
having this conversation with one of his daughters, and she's like, "But that's Hindustani." I'm like, "Yeah." She's like, "Huh? I guess we did know some." And I'm like, "Yes, you did." You know. So I
Yeah.
would say for me, I also like I've always had questions, right? And I tried to be a safe space for folks who have questions, because I know what it was like when I had questions and folks weren't necessarily a safe space. So I exist in this, not as rare as some might think, right? But as a Jamaican Muslim who is of African and Indian descent, who, we're now in the month of December and Kwanzaa is coming up. I'm probably the only person a lot of people at my workplace have met who celebrate Kwanzaa. So like as we've talked about like the holiday plans and stuff like that, and we're gonna have an ugly sweater day, and I'm like, cool. I got a sweatshirt that says Happy Kwanzaa on it, and they're like, is that religious? And I'm like, nah, it's cultural. Celebrate African heritage and whatnot. But for me, like I try to be that safe space, right? And again, when we talk about not speaking in absolutes, I had a really, really close friend of mine who came up with this beautiful analogy where it's the orange juice analogy, right? So Jamil doesn't like orange juice, not because he's Muslim. I just don't like orange juice. Now, I do like orange juice. I think a better thing would be to say broccoli. I don't like broccoli for real. But like that's the thing, right? So like when people meet me and they have questions like, "Hey, like I noticed you do XYZ." My thing is always like, "Hey, yes, because of me being Jamaican, me being Muslim." A perfect example, I was playing a Dean Frazier has a song on one of his albums, and part of it is the Deo, the Banana Boat song by Harry Belafonte, right? And so one of my coworkers who's Cuban was like, "Hey, um, you ever seen the movie Beetlejuice?"
Yeah.
So I've never seen the movie Beetlejuice, right? But I assumed there was a correlation between him asking me that and that song playing. So I was like, "Nah, man, I'm just Jamaican."
Okay.
And that's now become this running joke because like that was like a year ago.
Yeah.
He's recently showed me the clip from Beetlejuice, and I'm like, oh, I get it now. Nah, man, I'm just Jamaican.
Yeah.
you know and there are like a lot of these moments like I have with folks where like they'll say like, hey, I noticed you do XYZ. I'm like, nah, man, I'm just Muslim, or nah, man, I'm just Jamaican.
Yeah.
So like it's one of those things, and it's always funny, right? And like I always try to bridge humor into it. We did s'mores the other day, and I was like, I will get the marshmallows because if I get the marshmallows, I'm gonna get them from the halal meat market, so they're beef gelatin. That way, everybody collectively in the group can have some. Because the only prohibitions were some folks didn't eat pork, so I was like, cool, I don't eat pork. Let's do it, right? And one of my coworkers was like, I never thought about that there would be beef. I was like, yeah, man. I was like, there's beef bacon too. Like you'd be surprised, what there is and and so again, like bridging it with like humor, and folks at work will see me eating like a pepperoni pizza and they're like, Jamil?
Mm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Jamil? And I'm like, nah, guys, it's turkey. It's
Yeah.
fine. It's okay. That Hawaiian pizza, turkey and pineapple, it's fine. So like I always try to be and the door for me, the door is always open. Like as long as I gauge that the question is coming from a respectful place, I'm always happy to answer it to the best of my ability. And if I
Mhm.
can't answer, I'll be like, Google. I know folks say like, oh, I don't want to Google. I'd rather ask somebody. I'm like, hey man, sometimes just Google it.
Yeah. No doubt, no doubt. And I really like that. And I think, it really ties in so nicely actually to I think with our topic of alignment, right? Because it sounds like by fully actually honoring all parts of yourself, you've allowed yourself to actually take up your fair share of space within any room that you walk into. And I find that, when we do come from these backgrounds where we might not necessarily be the majority in a given room, we might have this tendency to like shrink and hide parts of ourselves and maybe just align with what we think is going to be the most readily fully accepted version of ourselves, right? And I think that one of the things I really admire about you is that you don't limit yourself, and put yourself in a box, right? I really, really like that because that is definitely a temptation, whether we enter a space and the environment wants to put us in a box, or we enter and we think that's the only way we actually belong there is if we actually do hide parts of ourselves. So, I think that by you doing what you do, you're actually allowing yourself to connect with the most aligned people and spaces and energy because you're allowing all of yourself to exist at the same time. So like I'm curious about you, like have you always been this proud and so focused on honoring all parts of yourself? Or did this come from a time where perhaps you found that you were doing certain things that put you out of alignment with what you truly wanted to be and how you wanted to show up, which then helped you to course correct? And this is the version that I'm speaking to right now. Like, how did that all play out for you?
So honestly, for me, it was definitely like my junior, senior year of high school, you know. And like I said, being Jamaican in South Florida it's not hard, right? You know, like one climate wise, Jamaica's of South Florida, very much the same, but then also just because of how many Jamaicans are here and which cities are known for having their large Jamaican populations, it's like it's growing up in it, you almost take it for granted because it's just like, okay, you know, another Jamaica night. All right, where's
Mm.
my black red, you know, my black, green, and gold, you know? So I would say for me, I started asking myself like, what does it mean to be Jamaican? Like, what is that? Because like for part of it was also like looking at friends who came from cultures that seemed more distant and saying like, oh, like they have these sayings and but again it was also more of like a linguistic thing because I'm thinking like I speak English, Jamaican patois is a English Creole. So but like then you see like your friend who speaks English and Spanish and you're like, ah, like they've got it going on, right? Not
Mhm.
really honoring the fact that Jamaican patois and growing up, you know, we call it a broken language, we call it a dialect.
Yeah.
And then I'll never forget, I heard a Miss Lou. I was watching Miss Lou, and she did a performance, and she spoke about how English comes from the Latin and the Greek and the French and all of these things, but they say it's derived, and but Jamaican patois is corrupt. And she said, "How is one corrupt and one derived?" And I said to
Mm.
myself, "Hey, she's cooking right now. She's cooking with some serious heat, you
Yeah.
know." And around that same time, I was applying for colleges and when I did the Common App said, well, what languages do you speak? I said English, and I was looking for some other languages that I barely spoke, but I was like, no one's really gonna check. But as I'm looking, right there is Jamaican English or Jamaican
Really?
English Creole rather, and I was like Jamaican English Creole. I was like, that's when I googled it. I was like, that's just patois. I was like,
Mm.
I've been bilingual this whole time, you know, and
Yeah.
and though like that was like the moment where like I really started advocating for my language first and foremost, right? And so a lot of my work, even in ABCs for the Jamaican Child, there are some parts where the characters speak to each other in patois. The English is there, but then the Jamaican patois is also there, you know, in the text. And I would say
Wow.
that you know, that aspect of it coupled with the family history research. So long story short, I started writing this book about a fictional family, started using a family tree software to keep the family in track, and then I looked at it and I said, if I can make up this family with all of its drama and I'm just a high schooler, I wonder what my actual family tree looks like.
Mm.
And that prompted me to start, you know, talking to my mom, talking to my nanny G, talking to my aunts, and getting, you know, building out our family tree that led to, you know, like Ancestry and 23andMe and like all these other things where like we started building out trees and like hardcore interviewing relatives and finding out more stuff. So I'd say like who I am now is the culmination of those two things. The realization that I was bilingual and how disrespected our Creole languages are
Mm.
and then also doing family history research and learning about my family and
Gotcha.
in learning about my family learning about who I came from and not just where I came from.
Mm. I love that. And it sounds honestly like you could write a whole course and deliver a whole course on this theme in itself. And so something before you officially put that program out for people to register is, I'm curious from you, like, we spoke about this idea that, everyone nowadays is trying to stand out by fitting in.
Mhm.
Right. And it's like, hang on, how on earth do we do that? That doesn't make any sense, right? Because then everything starts to look the same. Everyone doing the same thing, thinking that it's making them special. No, well, that's usually when we are perhaps putting parts of ourselves away, right? Stripping things down and really saying, nah, that's not the right room for this or whatever it happens to be. So, what advice do you have for people? Because I'm sure plenty are going to be inspired by the things that you've shared in this episode. What's some advice that you have for people who are really looking to like own their purpose and stand out by really owning who they are and showing up in the world, but maybe they haven't really seen an example of that, or maybe they're, maybe they have some of that negative self-talk going on within them, that's causing them to doubt whether they should do that. What would you share with them about that?
So honestly, I would say don't be afraid to start over, right? And I say that because sometimes we set out on a path and we say this is that path, right? But in order for us to show up fully, there has to be some type of shift, right? There has to be this
Mhm.
metamorphosis of I was going down this very like STEM track, and I'm realizing that that's not aligned with me, right? And I say that for myself, right? Like growing up, I always wanted to be a veterinarian. I was talking with a coworker today. I was like, I have an insane amount of animal knowledge in my head
Yeah.
from 18 years of wanting to be a vet. I no longer want to be a vet and have all this animal knowledge just in my head still, right? But
Hmm.
I would say like that for me, like that's what that looks like is not being afraid to start over and saying, okay, you know, I found the thing, because sometimes it's not as easy as saying I want to be this thing, and then your entire childhood going up into college, you pursue that one track, right? Sometimes it's I want to be this, and then you take a class or you have an encounter and you say, well, actually, I kind of like this, right? And so, but you might feel like I'm too old or I've put too much money or I've done this, I've done that. I'm not gonna lie to you. One of my role models is a man I've never met. I've only met him on paper. It's my grandmother's uncle. But like reading about his life in like certain documents, like he was born and raised in Jamaica in like a little East Indian village, was a teacher in the missionary schools, left the countryside, went to the capital, worked for the immigration department, went to Canada, right? So like everyone talks about this uncle that went to Canada. I did the research. He was there for 3 weeks and then tried to enter America, and
Okay.
America didn't let him in. He came back to Jamaica. And it's funny because I'm like, what was he there for three? Like he went there for school, right? But like he wasn't even there long enough to take a class. Like he was there for three
Right.
weeks and then he left. Comes back to Jamaica, starts an East Indian Association, right? So like comes back and starts community building, right?
Hmm.
Gets married, works for the railway station, retires from the railway station after 20 years to open a bar. Like,
Okay.
and that was his thing, right? And it's funny because even in that, like he opened the bar, then there's like a whole court case that happens because like they didn't want him to open it. It was like licenses and all these other types of things. But then he fought it, and then he had his bar. And
Hmm.
it's like he went through all of this, right? To just like ultimately all he wanted to do is just own his little bar. He owned his little bar, and that's what he
Yeah.
did. And so like that's why I say like don't be afraid to start over. Like I've started over and I've had relatives and friends who've started over, and I would say we're all the better for it because had we pushed through on that path that wasn't necessarily the one that aligned with us, sure you might be good at it, but are you aligned with it?
Hmm.
You know, like on a bad day, is that still something you want to do? Like I think about like my days at the museum and I'm like, on a day where all I'm doing is sitting down and just punching in inventory, that's like a bad day for me because like I'd rather be like engaging with the community or like do like building up exhibits, but like on a bad day, I'm just cataloging stuff. I'd
Hmm.
still rather be doing that.
Yeah. I get that. No, I really appreciate you sharing all that, man. That's big, and I think starting over is a big theme for many of us at this point in our life, no matter what age we're at. I think everyone is looking around and being like, okay, what do I want my life to actually look like, right? And I think that a big part of that, to be honest with you, is almost like the blessing that exists when there is turmoil, right? Like as we are all seeing and experiencing within the world. It's like it almost like I actually saw a meme that made me laugh because it's so real, right? They were talking about, I think they were talking about like the cost of living or inflation or something, and they were saying it's so high that you might as well follow your dreams, right? And I'm like, well, if that isn't a message in a bottle, I don't know what is, right? Because
Yeah.
it's just that. And I think that some of us sometimes we get disappointed. And I share this vulnerably about myself. Sometimes I get disappointed about, oh, you know what? I was really hoping for this promotion, but I didn't get it. And it's like, oh, dang, I guess that's not meant for me. And then, I mope about it, this and that. oh, I really wanted this and you don't get it. But it's like, there's such joy in, embracing that opportunity. It can be hard. It can be, you can resist it all you want to. But when you look at what opportunity exists within that, it's like, wow, I actually have a chance to explore and define myself in a new way, in maybe an expanded way than, what my previous path was allowing me to actually do. Right. And so I think like when we actually give ourselves permission to start over, that's when it's like, in the example you gave, it's like, well, maybe he went out and did all the things that, you're told and encouraged to do. And okay, you got your satisfaction from that. But hey, what do I want to do versus what do I need to do, or what should I feel responsible to have to do? Right. It's like
Sure.
that sometimes when the world comes and says, nah, hard wall here, no, sorry, you can't go no further. Sometimes that's the biggest blessing, whether that's in the way we identify ourselves, maybe tying only into one culture when we represent multiple, or other lived experiences that we all have, right? It's like seeing the beauty and opportunity that can exist when we kind of get that thing that's saying, maybe misalignment is what we're feeling right now, and we have that call within us to look for something different. So, one thing that I want to ask you is, about communication, right? Because I think that communication is a very big thread that's run through everything that we've talked about today, right? The idea that we need to really be mindful of our words because they carry weight and they create impressions, even among people who we might not think are looking at us, right? And I'm referring to kind of, those who are often younger than us, right? They're looking at us and what do we do with our time and our words and our actions, right? To really see what are they going to like what's being modeled to them and what do they ought to embody, right? So I think that communication is one thing that our community, just generally as human beings, I think we often struggle with, right? And communication is kind of at the heart of us being able to confirm whether we're aligned in a space or with our life purpose, and also to communicate to the people around us, what are we feeling, what do we need, right? Now, as men of the background that we come from, oftentimes that communication is very limited, right? We often maybe retreat rather than come forth openly with that communication because we're afraid that might be weaponized against us, right? So it's kind of like, let me just suck it up, let me, push it down and whatnot. I want to hear from you, about the importance of communication, especially as a man, right? And what you've noticed, whether with yourself or other men within your life and your ecosystem, when they actually resist that invitation to level up their communication game and actually express what's going on within them, right? Because I think that we're getting to witness, especially as, the generations older than us now are aging and reaching at this sort of critical point of, can you teach an old dog new tricks, is often what they kind of come back at us with, right? So I'm curious about you and how that kind of lands for you and how you're living your life.
Yeah, so for me, I definitely had to learn healthy communication styles, right? And I think again when we talk about like the older generation and that and how we model for the younger, it's that, right? Older generations, they did the best with what they had. And so because of what we have now, like we have access to therapy, to counselors, to all these other things, support groups that I'm not gonna say there are those before us didn't have access to support groups. Those support groups just look different, right?
Yeah.
And so because of that, how we now model for the younger ones is, I think we're making bigger improvements in that regard. I know for me, it's try talking about communication. I'm trying to find the right words to use, right?
Yeah.
Is one of those things where I think sometimes it's how we even go about it, right? I think sometimes we play off certain things, or there's kind of this, you know I find myself falling into like the very generic ones of like, oh, like, how are you doing, and like that's a like, whether they mean it or not, that's a very vulnerable moment where I could open up and tell you about
Mm,
everything, and I typically defer to the tried and true, man, I'm good, I can't complain. I
yeah.
really could complain. I could complain for a good little, but I'm like, man, can't complain. How about you? And then their response, especially if I'm talking to like again like someone in the older generation, If I say, "Oh, I can't complain," they'll say, "Man, and if you did, no one would listen." And I'm like, "Whoa, whoa!" The first time an uncle told me that, I was like, "Then why are we even asking this?" You know, like so like now, and I think like that's like something that like our generation has like done a better job at, right? Like if someone asks like how you're doing, like we may not divulge the full thing, but like we might share a little something. We might say, "Hey, are you in the space?" Like I've been in the I've been in the space where like I'll text a friend and say, "Hey, you got a minute for me to just like unload the clip?" And
Mm,
based off of what they say, like that's a conversation in and of itself. I think there's that one that says, "I have tea, is it herbal or verbal?"
yes.
And then like it's like, hey, it could be like me. I love a tea, right? So like it could be both. Like we can share a cup and talk about some stuff. But I would say that's the like in terms of like that communication, like having those spaces and like opening it up. Like I'm an old soul, right? I'm like I have some masjid uncles, and every Friday, like after Juma, like we'll sit, and some of the uncles are selling like aloo pies and stuff, and then there's like this lull that happens where it's just like five guys, and everyone just pulls up a chair, and we're sitting in a circle, and then one will say, "So what's the action?" Right? And then everyone's got to say like what their plan for the rest of the day is, right? And like we'll have like a little panchayat, and we'll all talk and stuff. And I'm glad that that's where we're at now versus like these kind of silos where we just hold it in and we're not really expressing ourselves, right? And I'm not even gonna lie to you, like I've been in spaces with some men, like who I would consider like uncles to me, and the vulnerability in which they've opened up. I think again we have these healthy communication styles that are modeled to the younger ones, but you'd be surprised how many of our older heads are looking at us and incorporating that amongst themselves.
Yeah, I think that's very true. Something that was communicated to me by some folks who are older than me that really helped to put it in perspective a little bit and kind of remove. I'll be real. I think I was coming at it with judgment, around how they were responding to me, as they kind of shared that, you generation right now, you guys have the privilege of time to actually sit with and explore what you're feeling,
Mm-hmm.
right? And like when I heard that, I'm like, damn, you know what? You're right. I can't be mad when I ask you, hey, what's going on? You don't seem all right. And you just tell me, no, I'm good. I'm good. Right. And, I think that really changed things for me, because I started to really approach the conversation with a bit more compassion and patience, as they might have just repeated the same responses they've given me for the previous 20 years when I'm trying to go a little
Mm-hmm.
bit deeper with them. It's like, now I understand a little bit why this is your reflex action, right? To respond in this way. And I totally get it. And I can relate to how you got the to the point of like, well, why are we even having this conversation if no one would even listen to me? I actually I don't know, something about me got a little edgier, I think, once I hit 30, and I like started to push the envelope a little bit more, right? And it's like,
Mm-hmm.
no, 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 hang on. I owe it to you to allow you to be responsible for your words. So if you ask me, Josh, so how are you today? I need to actually give you a chance to receive that, right? Otherwise, I can't sit here and be mad that we just keep going in the same predictable loop, because I didn't give you a chance to actually hear the goods about how I'm really feeling today, right? So let's give you a chance. Let's see. How do you respond? Not to judge you and put you in the hot seat, but you're asking. So let's see how you respond to this. Do you respond? You react? Do you appreciate it? Do you get up and say, well, this generation is just lost? They complain about everything. What are you going to say? Right? So I
Yeah.
found that was actually a very interesting invitation, and it almost had like a domino effect with some people, not everybody, but with some people, to actually be like, huh, if they ask me, I'll be honest, because when we're cleaning up after the party and everyone's gone home, and everyone's talking about how all we did is talk about food. Well, what chance did we give to
Mm-hmm.
shifting what we spoke about? Right? Not to say it's going to be a
It's
perfect
true.
science, but did we accept the invitation, or did we turn it down? And so, that to me really brought up a deeper sense of responsibility for how I show up in these spaces, especially when I'm looking to create some positive change and ripples that will be experienced by the generations that come after me. Right? It's no longer like it really comes down to this idea. And I know that you joined the community, the movement that we're working on, mindful masculinity emotion. And a big thing there, the call to action is grab the torch, right? And where that comes from is us, like, we honor our elders, but we have to be mindful enough to understand the point at which they have taken us as far as they are willing to take us. And at that point, we
That's
need
true.
to say, okay, I got it from here. Thank you. Right. And I feel like that's kind of what we do when, we look at how we communicate, right? When we maybe change up how we are inviting others to share how they're feeling, right? I found that one big thing that caused the reflex action of, oh yeah, I'm good, or I'm okay, whatever, is when we say, are you okay? Right? Because how you respond to that indicates so many things, right? So, our
Yeah.
reflex is a quick, like, yeah, I'm good, I'm good, I'm good. But what if we reframe that and said, hey, how are you? Right? All of a sudden, you got to
Mhm.
tap into a different bag of words. And chances are the fact that you're probably going to need like a half a second longer, and we're going to get to see that your brain is kind of doing that thing, all in itself is an invitation for us to now take this further if both sides are willing to do that.
So what's funny? There was an imam who like he would like ask like folks, he was like how you guys doing? And folks would be like, alhamdulillah, we're good. But like he started cutting them off. He's like, and before you say alhamdulillah, like actually think about it and tell
Mm.
me how you're doing. And it's funny because like after he said that, like when I'm like at the masjid and like in certain spaces, someone's like, how are you? Like my response is automatically, alhamdulillah. Like I think about it, right? And then folks are like, I don't like the fact that you had to think about that. And I was like, no, 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 no. I had to think about it because normally that was the default. Now that I've thought about it, like I'm more confident. Like even in that uncertainty of the that is my confidence in saying like, no, this is actually how I feel, as opposed to me being just like, yeah, man, I'm good. It's like, nah, I'm good.
Mm.
Because like now I'm thinking about it, I'm thinking about all the things that are going on, like, and it's not even about like bypassing it, right? It's just like genuinely saying like, okay, like in the grand scheme of things, I'm all right.
Mm. I love that. Thanks for sharing that, man. That's powerful. I love that. I think that we both have really signed up, not for anyone else's benefit per se, really for our own, and so that we can move as mindful masculine energy throughout this world. But I think we really dedicate ourselves to the craft of working with words and reviewing the game tape of how we've shown up in certain spaces. Maybe there was a way that we could have said this a little bit better. And I think, like, maybe a little bit more than the average bear, we kind of have built that as like a habitual way to understand how to move through the world more gracefully and more effectively the next time. Right. So, do you have any sort of practical tips, maybe even some exercises that have worked for you that you can share with our audience around how can we maybe communicate a little bit more effectively and clearly? Right. Regardless of man or woman, we could gear this towards the men because, we understand that, there tend to be maybe a few more hurdles that we try to jump over when it comes to clearly communicating as men. But do you have any words of wisdom or maybe something that people can try out once they're done with today, with this episode, and they're like, huh, you know what, I want to really shift some things based on what these guys chatted about.
So yeah, I would say I think this one is like a oldie but a goodie is the I statements, right? So I feel, I think, right? Because oftentimes when we have conversations, and especially when they get to be tougher conversations, folks are they jump to a defensive, right? And when
Mm.
someone starts saying like you made me feel, well, the person, that wasn't the person's intention, right? But if you say I felt like this because of this, right? It puts the onus on that, no matter how you acted or what your intention was, this was how I interpreted it, right? So I
Mm.
think for first and foremost is I statements. I also think allowing, I would say allowing space in certain interactions, but also if you feel that there's a, because like sometimes folks will say, oh, I think there's something there, but I'm not going to address it. I think sometimes leaving the elephant in the room is not good for the elephant or for the
Mm,
people who are going to be occupying that space, right? So I think I'm of that, and I am a very non-confrontational person. I tell this to people all the time. But in recent years, I've realized that addressing the elephant in the room sooner rather than later is always better,
mm,
right? So
mhm,
I
mhm.
would say for me, those have been the two things: is utilizing I statements and then addressing the elephant in the room, because uncertainty is like doubt and uncertainty is probably one of the amongst the worst feelings a person can have, right, about any
Mhm.
situation, right? And as one friend said, if it's not, if it's unclear, we're not working with it, right? And so in order to just be, effectively work with people and work with situations, it's always best to have a proper understanding and a clear understanding of just what's going on.
Yeah, no, I like those tips, man. And I'd love to add to that. One that I feel has helped me to become a better communicator. And to be honest, it came from a place of absolute frustration in a lot of different settings, especially settings where I'll just keep it real. Like I expected people to have a higher level of comprehension, right? So, let's go with, say, boardroom settings, for example, right? Now, to me, I found myself just getting constantly frustrated because, like, we're both speaking English. I don't understand where the miscommunication is happening. So, what I started to do to actually get the real time feedback is I would ask, after I say something, say I speak for like 10, 15 seconds, I would ask them right in that moment, okay, can you just like, run it back for me? What did you get from what I just said? Right? Because
Mhm.
that gives me a chance to see, what did you pick up, right? Did you tune out or something like that? But no matter what happened, right? I take responsibility and say, okay, you didn't receive the message that I was trying to send. Let me try again, right? And yeah, there has to be, it's a dance, right? Like the person has to make some effort on their side, but I'm not putting it on you to make the first move. I'm going to say, you know what? I missed the mark on that. Let me try again, right? And then, hey, what did you get from that one? That way, we're like, they're not feeling like they're telling us we did something wrong. It's literally like, what did you capture from what I said? Maybe I left something out, and I make sure I make that clear. Like, I'm not trying to say you missed something. It's like, I'm doing this for my own benefit to make sure that I'm communicating clearly. So can you just help me give me that feedback? And I find that that invitation in itself causes me to be inspired to be a better communicator, them to be inspired to be a better listener, and also to step up their own game when it comes to the communication, because now they've seen something, chances are, that hasn't been modeled to them before. You know, I found that to be incredibly effective.
And I like how you word it too, because oftentimes when I hear the, so what did I say? Right? Like that's the more aggressive
Mhm.
wording, I think. When you're talking to somebody, it's like, so what did I say? Right? Or repeat it back to me, right? But like the way you phrase it puts it in it's not confrontational, it's very, you know, conversational like, and I do think that no, like that is such a, I'm gonna add that to my tool belt because that's a good one.
Awesome. I'm glad I could help, man. So as we approach, wrapping up this episode for today, something that I want to know from you is, as you take stock of, how you've lived to this point in your life, right? And all the things that you're working on, and you see energy being put towards, other people working on as well. What would you say is really vital for us as human beings to add to our skill set if we're looking to succeed in 2026?
Hmm. I would say one is time management.
Hmm.
Um, I say this as a guy who is probably going to download his 2026 digital planner tomorrow. Haven't
Okay.
done it just as yet. Um, but I think about that just because when it comes to like a lot of things, right? I'm not one of those people who thinks of time as like this limited resource, but I am aware of like just how much time there is in a day. I've never been one of those people who's like, oh, if I had more hours in a day, if I had more hours in a day, I'd probably however my time is divided now, it would probably still be divided in those same increments. It would just be longer increments because there's more hours, right? But I think, making those, because once you have that time management and you're like, you're actually booking and seeing stuff in your calendar. And I'm saying this from a mentor of mine who was like, even something as simple as like going to the mosque weekly on Fridays, like that's on my calendar. I in my head, that's not a new thing, right? But it's a standing appointment that's in my calendar every Friday. And so I've adopted that mentality, right? So I have payday booked in my calendar. I have mosque booked in my calendar, right? The writing workshops that I lead booked in my calendar. The holidays are already sprinkled in there. But then also what happens now is, for example, like the appointment for our call, like I had that in my calendar. So I knew that between these hours, like I was not going to be doing anything because this is what we were doing, right?
Mhm.
And so even like making plans right now, I'm trying to make plans with my nieces to go see the lights in, for Christmas. And I'm saying to myself, all right, y'all need to let me know what day works for you, because this is what my calendar looks like, right? And I send
Yeah.
them a screenshot like, this is Uncle's calendar. Y'all, let's figure it out.
Okay.
And I do that because, again, like I said, like, with all the things that happen, right? It it gives you some semblance of control. There's very few things you can control, but what has access to you and your time is one of those few things you can. And when you
Mhm.
have that calendar, or you have a planner and you're taking stock of what your day looks like, it's also a good way to be mindful, right? One of the planners I'd gotten was like a month by month, a week by week, and a day by day. And I was like, I don't know if I'm that
Yeah.
mindful yet, right? But we definitely do the month by month and the week by week, day
Yeah.
by day is a little bit, I haven't gotten there yet. One day, but
Yeah.
I definitely think that helps.
Okay. Wonderful. And one from me that I think is going to help more of us to succeed in 2026 is kind of take kicking it a little old school. And what I mean by that is many of us probably have like automatic deposits or withdrawals and things set up. Probably we got those paperless bills, whether that's for our phone or our mortgage, whatever it happens to be. And my word of encouragement to everyone is to actually sit with the hard copies of those things and actually run back the math. And the reason I say that is because, overall, I think we all feel like time is moving faster than ever. And we have fewer hours in the day to get everything that we need to get done. So, what I personally feel and have seen for myself, for former clients, all of that kind of stuff, is that when we get too tired, where we can't actually fact check the numbers, that's where everything starts to go off the rails. Because we're kind of expecting other things or situations or organizations to care more about us than we care about ourselves. So, what I find is that it was actually quite a trap under the guise of convenience for us to have these paper billings or direct withdrawal type things. And that I find keeps people trapped and in a state of feeling hopeless because we don't know where our money's going, right? And I think, especially as men, we do pride ourselves in trying to feel in control of our finances and make enough and all of those things. But if we aren't actually paying attention and have our finger on that needle to understand what's happening, we're not going to feel in control, right? So we're going to
Right.
keep spinning our wheels, staying stuck in what we feel is comfort, when that might actually be a prison disguised as comfort. And that's what I personally found, and which is why I've gotten to live my life differently over the last year and a half is because I said the math is not mathing. And I need to sit down and do this math because I know how to do this math. And so when I did that, I felt that was very much a take my power back type of moment, a real turning point in my life because at the end of the day, stuff has to add up. Like anything has to add up, right? The value we feel we're receiving from something, be that a person, a place, or a thing, all of it. We feel like it needs to be in balance, right? And oftentimes when we're probably afraid to actually look at these numbers because we know deep down something's off. But we at the same time don't want to confront that because we know how much discomfort that's going to cause.
Yep.
So that would be what I think is one shift that more of us need to embrace if we're truly going to live these more purpose-driven lives where we can be more present versus just maybe mentally absent even when we're physically present.
I
So I want
agree.
to share that. So now that we're wrapping up, man, I want to just turn it over to you to share with the folks what's the best way to connect with you. Whether that's on social media or websites, things like that. Some reasons why they might want to connect with you. Maybe even if you have some things that are in the works that you're looking for, people to be part of. This is totally your time to share that with the world and let them know, the value of connecting with you and getting to know you on a deeper level.
Yeah, so that's a great one. So for like folks who are interested in the my children's books, so Eva My Nanny G and ABCs for the Jamaican Child, I have an Instagram page. So it's author Jamil Ninsu, that's author and then my name. So that's my Instagram for everything book related. If you want to keep up with like my random adventures and just like general social media, that would be Dogla Boy with an underscore on Instagram and X, and then Dogla Boy without an underscore on TikTok. And
Okay.
then yeah, nah. So I mean, reasons you might want to keep up. Like I said, like I do post, historical content, educational content on TikTok and Instagram, as well as if you're Jamaican and you have like genealogy questions. So that's something that I've done in the past. I'm now offering like more like solid services. Like in the past, it was just, like a friend of mine might mention they needed help and I would offer help, and you
Mhm.
know I I could get a food off afterwards, but like now, like, if you want like a session, a consultation, I'm more than always happy to sit down and, gauge, what resources we can utilize to best help you do that type of research. And yeah, if you're ever in South Florida, hit up Island Space Museum. You can find me there. If you want to book a tour with me, by all means, go for it.
Wonderful. And you mentioned some workshops and whatnot. So are those things that you still run, and are those online or in person, or, how would people go about, like, say they wanted you at one of their events, is there a way to get in touch with you through that? Is that something that you offer?
So that the writing workshops, I do lead some occasionally. Those are based here in South Florida. If you wanted to book like a online one, I'm happy to we can facilitate and discuss that as well. I would say you could contact me through Instagram, send me an Instagram DM and let me know what you're looking to do. And then if you wanted to book me, um, inshallah, like next year, there's gonna be some moves. I'm still trying to iron out the details now, but like there are some moves for like public speaking and workshop and those type of sessions.
Okay, wonderful. Well, I mean, those are just plenty more reasons to stay, in the loop of all the things that you're doing, bro. So, I want to thank you for your time today. I definitely got a lot of value out of this conversation with you, and I think that there's a lot of wisdom that was shared in the time that we've spent together, and I do trust that once people do get to see this episode, they are going to have a lot of things that touch their spirit in a great way. And I think make them that much more curious about themselves, who they've been, who they are, and who they want to become. I truly feel like that's what they're going to really be left with and inspired with some practical things that they can do, because they've seen it modeled. And I think that we have done a good job of showing how this can be done in a very mindful way that doesn't have to overcomplicate things. Right. And it's really about meeting other people on a very human level, right? Understanding what's the goal that we're trying to achieve here and, kind of doing the backwards way that we can get to that outcome. I think that's a very mindful way that we're both approaching things. So I want to thank you for that, and I want to thank you for all the wonderful work that you do out in the world. I see that, a lot of people are deeply impacted by it, and even for those who don't necessarily hit the heart button or leave you a comment, I just want to thank you on behalf of everybody because you're doing incredible work, and I look forward to continuing to support you, bro. So thank you. And, to everyone who has tuned in to watch this episode, thank you all so much. We would love to know in the comments what you liked, what you loved, what you learned. Maybe if there's something that you want to learn more about, because, I don't want to jump the gun here, but, for me, man, I think that this is just the first of many conversations that I'd love to have with you. And, I think that it provides a tremendous amount of value. So until next time, everyone, thank you for tuning in. We appreciate you for sharing this time, space, and energy with both of us. All right. Take care, my bro.
Thank you. You too.